eerie morning or magical midnight, wherever, whenever you may be, across the dimensions or around the vibrations. I'm Tilly Treadwell, and oh, have I got a show for you. Won't you join us on The Weird Walk Home? Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Tilly Treadwell, and today I have with me Darrel Denton. He is prolific in this field, and I think that he has some pretty awesome things to share with us today. We wanted to focus on some of his more personal encounters, but he has a lot of other cool news for us too. Hi, Darrel. Thank you so much for joining us. How's your day going?
Hey, Billy, thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be here. Day's going good. Yeah, thank you again for having me. Of course, I'm Darrel Denton. My group is Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures, and we're a group that allows everybody to be in as long as they're respectful and they don't do any criticism or rude attitude toward any of the other members, pictures, or conversations. But I've been researching well, actually, it all started for me in '92. I actually didn't really get to research until about 7 years later. I was too frightened to go into the woods after my first experience, but I got started from there mainly. And a lot of people call me the Tennessee Bigfoot man, and I run into people all the time, and that's basically how they address me. So, anyway, I'm just a regular guy that had some experiences and learned about these creatures by complete accident. And I wasn't looking to do that. I was basically deer hunting in my first encounter. So,
Yeah, so maybe you could say that you're an extraordinary guy. I'm sorry, an ordinary guy with some extraordinary experiences.
I would probably say that's a good way to put it because I've had some crazy experiences. Like I said, my first experience was in 1992, November the 6th, to be exact. And I was on my grandfather's farm that he had lived on all of his life since he was very young, and he didn't live too far from there when he was young. And I was deer hunting with three friends of mine in different areas of where we were hunting, and I was in a tree about 25 foot up in a deer stand, ready to hunt on open and black powder season that morning, and just waiting for the moment and looking for the big trophy rack buck deer, which that's what I did in those days, and a lot of hunters still do. And out steps this creature out of this cane thicket next to me, and I don't get scared very easy. I've camped in those woods all my life, and as a little boy, I camped there, just me and my dog and my gun and my shotgun, and never worried about anything like that. But this creature pretty much scared me more than I knew I had fear in me. It come across and jumped across a creek and walked right straight in front of me and showed me its teeth, looking right at me in the tree straight up above. I was on about a 45-degree angle hill in a tree 25 foot up, so I was kind of looking over on it. And then it growled at me, and when it growled, that's when I got a little scared. First of all, I couldn't believe what I was seeing because I'd never seen anything like that. And then it walked over to a tree limb where I had a scent rag hanging up to attract deer, and just ripped the whole tree limb out of the tree and threw it on the ground, and then walked right back to where it was at and turned and faced me again and kept staring at me, the meanest, ugliest looking thing I've ever seen still to this day. And then it let out a scream that I've never heard, and it echoed all down through that hollow. And I thought, well, this is it. This thing's coming across the creek. It's going to pull me out of this tree and tear me apart. But I had my hand on my trigger, and I was practically frozen. I was trying to get my breath. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And
Yeah.
then it just turned and walked away. And instead of climbing down my tree stand, I jumped from the very top, about 25 feet up, and slid down and threw some leaves into the creek, and then I took off running as fast as I could back toward my grandfather's place, which was about a 45-minute walk, probably 30 minutes running. And every time I would run a little bit, I'd look back and to see if it was following me. And after I made it over the second hill, I looked back and it was standing there looking at me. And there may have been another one, but it looked like the same one. And ran all
Mm-hmm.
the way back to my grandfather's house and jumped a fence to get there and kept looking back. And when I went in, my grandfather was 92 years old at that time. And he said, my granddad never called me by my name. He called me boy. He said, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I didn't say nothing. I was so out of breath that
Sure.
I got up and ran and looked out the door and locked it and made sure this thing wasn't coming and kept looking out the windows. And I sat down over in the corner of the living area across from him. He said, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I said, "Well, I seen what looked like a monster to me in the woods." And he said, "A monster?" And I said, "Yeah." I described it to him. He goes, "Oh, you seen the woodbooker?" And I said,
Oh.
"What is a woodbooker?" I said, "I've never heard of a woodbooker, and you've never told me anything about them." He said, "Well, I don't talk much about them, but I've seen four in my lifetime, and sometimes I'll be working in the field, and they'll be standing there looking at me. I
Mm-hmm.
hear them a lot more than I see them." And he said, they're going to hurt you. They're just territorial. They don't like you in their area. You probably upset its hunt. He was probably looking for the same deer you were." And but still, I was pretty frightened. And, basically, I didn't deer hunt anymore. For
Of
I didn't
course.
go in the woods for about 6 or 7 years. What hunting I did do was from my truck in a field or something. But it was life changing. It changed my life from that time on. And I
Yeah.
still have that feeling, but I'm not nearly as fearful now of them. I've been around a lot more of them since, and never seen another one like that one. That was a really different looking one. So
Hmm.
that's how it started for me. So
Wow. I think that's really interesting. Your story is mirroring a lot of other stories and reports that I've gotten in the past as a paranormal investigator and a paranormal counselor. And even to this day, for example, last year there was a gentleman who contacted me after watching actually my very first episode of The Weird Walk Home, which was all about not deer, if you're familiar with that concept. He said that when he was younger, he had gone out hunting, I think with his dad and his uncle or something. And much like you, he was hunting deer. And he was up in the it's called a blind, right? Or a stand.
well, yeah, it's called a deer stand if you're in the tree. If you're on the ground, it's called a blind. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can tell, but I don't hunt.
that's
So,
okay. I don't do very much hunting anymore either, but and not because of that incident. There was a reason a long time why I didn't hunt, but I just don't hunt like I once did. Kind of hate. I gotten kind of soft in my older age. I don't like to kill the deer anymore. So
yeah,
that's my basic reason.
I support you in that too. Um, but this guy said he was up in a stand. Okay, yeah, it's a stand.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was like you, looking for a nice big buck. And he said that he saw this massive buck walk into his line of sight in the meadow nearby. And he went to uh, put his aim on it with the gun. And he said that the deer stopped and just like turned its head and looked right at him. And he got this weird feeling. And then he said that the deer, when he went to take a shot, it stood up on his hind legs and was staring him down in the stand. And then when he went to
Wow.
shoot it again, his gun had stopped working. And he said that the deer ran at him on two legs like a person. And he was so terrified that he tried to get down the stand, and he said he fell like halfway down or something. And he said that he messed up his ankle, ran back to the truck, but that while he was running, he could hear the pounding two-legged footsteps of the deer behind him, and that it chased him that way for almost the entire way back. And he said that every time he would turn around, he didn't see it, but he could hear it. It was right behind him. And he said that it was the most terrifying experience of his life. He wound up putting it on Reddit and asking
Wow.
for advice how to appease whatever god or spirit he had upset. And he wrote me
That's
asking,
that's
yeah,
definitely an unusual story. I've never heard of that before, but I'd say it's probably believable after the things I've seen. I think anything's possible. So
yeah, I believed him. I've heard many stories about similar encounters when deer hunting up in a stand or quail hunting, for example. It seems like a lot of these non-human people really don't like human beings coming into their territories unless it's under very specific conditions. And I support them in that. I think that they deserve to have the wild lands. And I do think that a lot of the time human people are kind of an invasive species. So
I
I
agree.
think fair. Yeah, you agree?
Yeah.
So
When
I
you
get
get into when I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. When you get into the woods, you the creatures that live there, that's their home.
it. Hmm.
And I tell people that all the time. It's just like, people say, "Well, what do you mean?" And I say, "Well, I mean the creatures that live there, especially the Bigfoot, for example, all the creatures, but there's a difference, in my opinion, between forest people, which looks like a Bigfoot, but they're what I've experienced. They're completely different than the other Bigfoot or Sasquatch. My people that I'm related to, which is the Lakota Sioux, we call them Chayutanka, which is a word for the great elder of the forest. And these creatures, they know what your inner being is, somehow have a way to read certain people, and they know if you have a good heart, and they know your intentions when you go in there. And when you visit their home, they are just like us. If somebody walked into our house we didn't know, they would be a little nervous and probably be fearful and want to run you out of there because they don't know you. And it's the same thing with these beings. So I can definitely believe that statement for sure.
Yeah. Yep. And that's kind of what I wound up explaining to him. And he originally wanted to go back to the forest to make amends, leave an offering or something, but he hadn't been there in over 10 years. And based on his experience, I told him that I wouldn't advise him as a professional for him to go back because the second time around, it might not be a warning no matter what his intention is, especially if he still believes in eating deer meat or something of that nature, because we don't know exactly what upset or offended that other person. And I think it's better in some cases just to stay out of the woods entirely. What do you think, though?
Mm. Well, I don't. It depends on the person, I guess. I mean, you got first thing you have to learn to do, and it took me. I learned a lot of lessons from my first experience. My
Mhm.
grandmother was part Lakota Sioux, and she taught me a lot about it. She had a lot more of the Native American culture in her than I did, but she taught me a lot about that. And those people are very spiritual about the woods. As far as going into the woods, I think anybody that has a fear of something, they're better off to try to face that fear and overcome it, unless there's a great deal of danger. But most of the time, the danger is in your mind more than it is really there. And I learned that from my first experience because, after I thought about that, years went by, if this thing wanted to get me, it could have, but it
Yes.
didn't. It didn't. So its intention was mainly to scare me out of its area, and it done a good job at it. But,
Mm.
and it took me a long time to go back into the woods. And I would have probably never felt the same about the woods if I hadn't had my second experience, and that was by complete accident. Wasn't hunting, but there's different type things that are out there people don't understand, the average person that doesn't get out in the woods really doesn't know the woods, and you
Mhm.
have to be in there a while and being there quite often to see things that are not normal in our mind. It's hard for people to imagine something like that in the woods, especially somebody that's never seen one.
Mhm.
It's hard to wrap your mind around something like that even being possible to be living in the woods. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just a normality.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's fair enough. Um, Almost all of my experience has to do with land guardians and domestic interferences, such as hauntings, attempted possessions, things of that nature. And so I find it fascinating when I can talk to someone who is on the complete opposite end from myself. So you're out there, you're dealing with peoples such as the dogmen and Bigfoot and other types of wild people. What would you say has been the most important or most impactful memory or experience that you've had from working with encountering these types of peoples?
Well, I've had, like I said, my first experience was the what got me into this, and I really didn't want to see another one of those creatures. That
Yeah.
one was enough for me, but I had nightmares for quite a while over that. It was very scary, but excuse me. I was actually fishing at a spot very remote that I'd fished at for years. About 7 years after that, it was in '99, and I went into an area, and nobody ever goes in this area because it's just too far back in there. You have to drive down an old road and park behind a water treatment or sewer plant, and you have to have permission to do that. And I happen to know the people there, so I was in that area when I had my second experience. Excuse me.
Sure.
But anyway, if I hadn't had my second experience, I would have probably never went back into the woods again. My second experience when I went in to fish, I went in with some minnows to fish. It was on the river, Sacramento River in Tennessee. And I'd been fishing for about an hour, and I went back. You have to walk down the bank a ways to reel in your fish. There's a sandbar that goes out into the river when the water's normal level. Because if you don't walk down to there, your line will get hung up in the roots and stuff that are hanging out of the bank. And I'd come back up to get another minnow. I'd caught a fish, and my minnow bucket was gone. Couldn't figure out what happened to it. I looked around for it everywhere. Couldn't find it. There wasn't any wind that day or anything, and it was probably in February or early March that year. And so I couldn't fish. I didn't have any minnows, so I went ahead and left. I looked around everywhere. I never did figure out what happened to it. And came back the next weekend, and same thing. Started fishing and went down to the river again. This time the water was up though, and the sandbar wasn't there, so I had to go down to the edge of the bank there where the roots were out and reel the line in to keep it from tangling around the roots and that were sticking out of the bank, and went back and to get a minnow again with my minnow bucket, and I had a 5-gallon bucket that I carried all my equipment in, and I would put it against the tree and I would sit on it while I was fishing. And when I went back, the minnow bucket was gone again, and I'm thinking, well, somebody's in here and they're taking my minnow bucket. This is very
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
And I started looking around, and this day it was kind of windy and it had been raining. It was a spring day and it was kind of cool. And I looked around everywhere thinking maybe the wind had blew it in the river, but it did. I never did find it that particular day. So I went in and left again. And the whole time the next week or two thinking about who could be down in this place taking, it had to be a person because somebody just don't walk off with their minnow bucket, or I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine a regular animal. So,
Yeah.
possibly be doing it. So went back. It wasn't the next week. It was a couple weeks after that. And this time, though, I took a small rope and I tied it on the handle of my minnow bucket. It was just a styrofoam minnow bucket, but it had a metal handle on it to carry it with. And I tied a rope that I took with me. It was about 10, 15 foot long. I tied it around the handle and I tied it around the tree. And that way I knew if somebody tried to get it or they would take a minute or two to get it
Mhm.
loose from the tree and I could catch who was doing it. So I wasn't going to have my bucket stole again. So I'd caught a
That
couple of
was
fish.
the
Caught a couple of fish that day. It was pretty similar to the times before. And I
way.
came back up and sat down in the bucket to put another minnow on and to bait my hook. And I looked, and before I got back to the bucket, I noticed the rope was real tight and it was stretched over into the game trail. There was a game trail that went through there, and it was about 200 yards from where I parked. And I walked down this game trail to the spot on the river. There was an opening there that I fished. And there was a lot of kudzu, if you know what I'm talking about, this big green looking ivy stuff that grows thick on the river. So you
Mm.
can't through it.
Oh,
It's huge. Grows on the side of these banks and stuff. And it's real thick. And I looked over to where my rope was stretched, and it was on that game trail that went into that ivy stuff that most people call kudzu in my area. But it was real tight in there. You had to bend down to get through there. And I went over and followed the rope, and I seen my minnow bucket set in there. And the trail was real because it had been raining. And I got to a minnow bucket. I had to stoop down low to get it in there to get it. And when I did, I noticed another minnow bucket in front of me, maybe 7 or 8 foot, laying over in the kudzu. And I noticed another one a little further than that over to the right. And I thought, well, that must be my two minnow buckets that I lost before. And I
yeah.
actually got down in there and went and retrieved them both. And it was real low to get through there. And it was hard to get in there, but I picked them up and set them over next to the tree. And I went back to get the minnow bucket that was stretched with the rope. And when I looked down at the minnow bucket, the lid was pulled off of it and it was hanging on the side. And there was water sloshed out of the minnow bucket. And down in the minnow bucket, there was only one minnow. And I had like 3 or 4 dozen in there. And I thought, well, this is strange. Why would somebody take all the minnows out of the minnow bucket? And around the minnow bucket, like I said, it was kind of muddy. And when I reached down to pick it up, I noticed a large footprint, but it was right next to the minnow bucket. And when I looked at the footprint, I thought, well, this is really kind of weird. Somebody's trying to get my minnow bucket. Who would be down here this time of year, 30 degrees at night, or it was probably in the 40s that day. And I can't imagine somebody being down here walking around the riverbank barefoot this time of year. And
Yeah.
I was kind of puzzled by it. And I picked the minnow bucket over and brought it back next to the tree. And of course, I only had one minnow, but I just act like I was continuing fishing because I was trying to figure out who was stealing my minnow bucket. I done lost interest in fishing, but I
Yeah.
was sitting on the 5 gallon bucket and watching, just kind of looking at them out of my left for visual vision to see if something, who was getting it, and because somebody had pulled it over there and they couldn't get it loose. And I probably sat there an hour or two. I was about ready to leave because I didn't see anybody, I didn't hear anybody. And then all of a sudden, I would look down the trail just a little bit. I was acting like I was fishing again, and then I looked up, and this creature, it was holding on to a tree, a small tree, probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter. And it wasn't a huge one, but it was holding on to the tree and it was leaning out like this,
Yeah.
looking down that trail at me. And when I seen it, I thought, oh my goodness, I've got around these things again. And I was really alerted, just kind of frightened in a way, but it didn't look like the one I'd seen before, and it wasn't a 8 foot tall one like the one I'd seen before. It was probably about 5.5 foot tall, but it was definitely one of those creatures. And it would hold the tree and bend down and look at me, and then it would go hide its head again. Then it would bend and look at me and go back in. And
Wow.
I watched it for a few minutes, and I thought, well, it's time to go. I don't want to be around these things again. And I got all my gear and headed back to my truck and put all my stuff in, and it kind of stayed on my mind. I couldn't get it off my mind. It was. I thought about it constantly, and I thought, well, I'm not letting these creatures run me off. I'm going back. So it was probably 3 or 4 days later. It wasn't even a week later. I built up enough courage. I was going back, and I went back in 3 or 4 days later and set up all my equipment. This time I carried my shotgun with me, and I laid it against the side of this tree and set up normally, turned the bucket upside down and sat on it like I was fishing again, and set my minnow bucket next to me. And I'd probably been sitting there 2 or 3 hours, and I could hear something moving in there, and I knew what it probably was. And then I looked up, and there it was again. It was leaning out, looking at me, and I just looked back at it normally, and I seen that it didn't seem like it was aggressive or mean like the first one I'd seen. And
Sure.
it kept looking at me, and I'd look at it, and that went on for a couple of 2 or 3 hours, and
Uh-huh.
then another one came in, and it was behind this one, and it was about the same size as that one, and it was looking around the other one, and they were both looking at me. And
Mhm.
I reached to grab my gun, thinking, well, there might be a bigger one in here. It's going to attack me. And I watched them pretty much that whole afternoon, those two creatures, and they never were as aggressive with me or seemed to bother me. And I felt pretty comfortable with them, but it was really a blessing in a way, because I don't think I would have ever felt good about going around those creatures or being in the woods again if I
Mhm.
haven't run into those. And I became really
Yeah.
close to those creatures, and I started bringing them things. And this was before I'd ever even heard of gifting. I didn't even have a cell phone at this time, so this was in probably 2000. I think I did have a cell phone then, but I did. It wasn't. It was one of those big old long ones, the big heavy ones that were first come out, and I didn't even bring
Oh,
it in.
yeah. The bricks.
Those, yeah, the big brick looking things had a long
Yeah.
black antenna, it wasn't cameras or anything like we have now, but I started going back in there. I would get home and think about it, and I actually made a little wooden box out of 2x4s and a piece of plywood, and I went in, and there was, above that tree I was sitting on, there was a branch that kind of branched off from the tree, and I nailed that box into the tree, into the branch, and put stuff up in it to see what they would do, and they wouldn't come and get it in front of me. They would kind of
Right.
step back and they would look at me. But when I left and I'd come back, I started going in every day or every other day. And
Mhm.
I would leave them things, I just whatever. I left them rocks, even left them a small ball. I left them many of things. And then I started bringing them food. And I didn't really know what kind of food they eat. I found out real quick they didn't like bananas. I didn't want them at all. But I brought a lot of different things, and come to find out the thing they liked the most was cantaloupe. They loved it,
Mhm.
and they really liked jelly filled any kind of bread products they loved. But they loved jelly filled donuts. But you couldn't just throw them on the ground. They were kind of
Yeah.
like us. They wanted them like either on a plate or in the box where they weren't on the ground. And I would lay them over there, and the one that I'd seen first, and I it was a female, and I got to be real friendly with her, and she would come out, and I would set it over there next to the edge, and she would come out and pull the box back, and she would open it up and eat one, and then the other one would come in, and it was 3 or 4 times I was in there before I seen the 3rd one, and the 3rd one was a big one. He was big, and he would stand behind them, and they were all squatted down because it was a real low place there, and but this was a lot bigger one. He wasn't fully grown, but he was bigger than these 2, and he would look down and look at me just to make sure, I guess, they were okay with me,
Maybe
and this
I am one of these forest people too, because I would show myself if you offered me a box of jelly-filled donuts, to be honest.
well, I think a lot of people would, and I even took them, some other things too that I learned they liked. They love cooked bacon like we all do, but I
Oh,
took them
yes.
some bacon. They love bacon, but they
Mhm.
were real particular on what they eat, and this was over, a 3 or 4 year period, and I was going in there every day or every other day, and I would sit 2 or 3 hours and try to communicate with them, and they started making me gifts, and that was really cool. They made me a milk carton that looked like it had been in the river. It was one time red and white, but it was pink and white where it had faded out, and they
Yeah.
stuck these sticks they stuck these sticks through all 4 sides, and the sticks come out to form an X on all 4 sides, and they had a little vine wrapped around them, and they left that in the box for me as a gift, and I became real friendly with these creatures, and I really did like them, and they liked me, and I was thinking of more things I could do with them. But nearly every
Mhm.
time I was going in there, I would tell them my name. I'd say, "My name is Darrell. Please tell me your name." I was trying my best to
Sure.
communicate with them. Basically, all I got was, a few weird noises or a few grunts or just a different type sound, and wasn't any English or anything, and nothing that I really understood, but I could tell that they liked me and I liked them. They were friendly with me, and so one day I went in and I was thinking, what can I get them that would be different? And I went to I bought a little bag of the little plastic whistles like you buy for a birthday party or something.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
just
yeah.
little plastic whistles
Little, party
like
favors for
kids blow.
kids. Mhm.
Yeah, little plastic whistle, and it had. I went to the dime store and bought them. I think there was 7 or 8 in a pack, and had a little black string around the little plastic hole where you could hang them up. And I hung them all over the limbs there around the gifting box, and I thought, well, let's see what they do with these. And I left that afternoon, and the next I think it was a couple of days later, I was real excited to get back to see if they knew how to use them or they had
Yeah.
gotten them. And as I was going, when I was walking in the woods, I always introduced myself as I was walking the trail. I'd say, "Hey, I'm here to see you. I hope you're doing good today. I'm just come to visit you." And then they started blowing these whistles, and I heard
Oh,
whistles blowing
cool.
everywhere, blowing back in deeper in further than I could see them, and one was blowing across the river, and it was pretty alarming. I couldn't believe that these creatures were, they were intelligent enough to do that. And then I knew that they weren't just some kind of ape. These were different. They were way more intelligent by the way they built me gifts too. So it took some intelligence to do that. You're not going to get a ape or a monkey to make you a box with sticks sticking out like that. And then I was trying to communicate with them still, and you know, I kept trying to communicate with them. Sorry about that. Sorry about
Mm,
that. But
yeah.
I was still trying to communicate with them, and I went in, and one day it was probably close to the 3.5 years that I've been going in there. It's quite a while when I've been going in there to see them as often as I could. And sometimes I couldn't stay as long as I could other days. But I went in one morning and I said, "Today's the day. Please tell me your name. I'm Darrell," and I do like that. And I'm sitting there again, opening up a box of donuts to pass them to push over next to. I had a little tray. I put a couple of them on, and all of a sudden I'm looking down doing that, and I hear Aletha, and
Oh.
said, "What?" I said, "Your name is Aletha," and she goes, "Aletha," and I said, "You can speak English." And she didn't. That's the only words I ever got out of them. And then the one behind her, I said, "What is your name?" He never answered or did anything. He just looked at me. And they would kind of do stuff I would do. If I would move, they would move that way, or they were kind of mocking what I did. And then the bigger one came in, and I asked him, I said, "Can you tell me your name?" And he didn't say anything at first. And I said, I told him my name again, and he said, "Tobias." So I had a Aletha and a Tobias. I don't know what the other one's name was, but I tried my best to communicate with them for that whole entire time. And I asked them lots and lots of questions, where they came from and everything else. And they would make gestures and they pointed up. And I said, "Does that mean you're from the heavens or another galaxy?" And they would point up. But I learned that they were very intelligent. They knew some of my language that I knew
Mhm.
because I would call them the Chayutaka, and they'd look at me like they knew what that meant. They would kind of give me a head gesture, and I asked them if they knew English. They just looked at me, and I knew they did because they wouldn't have the English names. But they have their own language too. I could hear them communicating with each other. But that went on for a long time, and it was really. I actually went in there and stayed all night with them several times. Took my sleeping bag and slept the same place where my bucket was, and they were over in there, and they'd come out all night long and look at me. Then they'd go back in. Then they'd come and look at me again and go back in. So I wasn't frightened of them. I felt real comfortable with them, and I'd gotten tied up working quite a bit, and I didn't get in there for the first time ever in probably about 12 or 13 days. And I was worried about it the whole time. I needed to get back in there because I'd never been gone that long from them, and I didn't want them to think that I'd forgotten them. But anyway, it was almost a couple of weeks, may have been a couple of weeks by the time I got back down there. And I started yelling when I was going in for them. And they had bulldozers in there or some type of a construction equipment, and they had cleared out that whole area. I guess maybe it was, the water plant or whatever that place was that I parked. They were apparently going to build on or expand that area, and all the kudzu was gone. The ground was torn up, and there were stakes in the ground with little pink plastic strips on them, and like they were staking off an area. And I got real worried about them because I didn't know what had happened to them. And I walked all back in there, way back behind where I'd went before, and
Mhm.
yelled their names and hollered for them and told them I was here. And it bothers me today because I was really learning so much from them, and learning their meaning and what they thought about me. And I think I would have progressed a lot further with time, but I don't know what happened to them. I never seen them again. And I went back in there numerous times over the years, even after that. I never seen them again. So I don't know if they were killed or what happened to them, but it still kind of stays on my mind still. I would like to go back and find them again, but haven't seen them. Don't know where they went, or if the government went in and killed them, or what happened to them.
Yeah, that makes
Very strange
sense.
why they very strange why they would just leave like that. But I even got a boat and went down the river on the other side trying to find some tracks and yelling for them. And they knew my voice when I would come in, and they knew my voice when they heard
Right.
it. And they something happened to them. I don't know what happened to him for sure, but something definitely happened to him. But that was
Right.
the big thing that changed my whole thought train. And I know that was a long story, but I'm sorry to take so much of your time on that. But that was really what got me going into this again because really wasn't fearful of them anymore. And I
Mhm.
seemed to have some type of presence that they liked about me.
Oh, I
So,
could agree with that. Give me just 1 second, please. Hey, honey, could you please bring me my charger and plug it into the extension cord for me? Thank you. I'm so sorry to ask. I didn't realize, but my tablet is lower on battery than I thought it was when we started. So,
oh, it's okay. I do that all the time. No big deal. I do it all the
yep,
time myself.
yep.
But anyway, that's what got started me into all that, and I didn't know. I've had a lot of other experiences too that would take too much time to tell you, but over the years, and they pretty much find me now. I don't find them, but in some areas I seem to find them pretty quick, in other areas I don't.
Mhm. For
But
sure.
then
So,
got into the dog man pretty big at one time.
yeah, I could imagine. I wanted to say that I find it interesting that your people before they left or whatever may have happened that they were pointing up to the sky because it could also be this is my theory anyway that they are interdimensional. So, for example, I was working a case once where the tipping factor for the gentleman who owned the land and the house on that land was that he was out walking in the woods near the oak grove and he saw in broad daylight, I think he said it was like between 7 and 8 feet tall, massive, hairy, Bigfoot looking person walk face first into an oak tree and disappear into the tree. So it makes me wonder if there is an interdimensional element to it. And I really do think that there is. So I wonder if maybe they
Well,
simply
I
left
can
to another dimension instead of staying and dealing with the governmental interference there, if that makes sense. What do you think about that?
well, I 100% know they can go interdimensional. Well, I have no doubt about that.
Okay.
Ron Moorhead is one of my closest friends, research partners, and
Mhm.
probably wrote the best book that's ever been written explaining that. It's called The Quantum, and it's a very powerful book, and you'll have to read it a couple of times, maybe three times, to really soak it all in. I had to because it breaks down a lot of different aspects of the quantum, which is, these creatures have a higher frequency than we do, and their energy is much higher. Matter, I mean, when you go back to even Einstein, matter turns into energy. That's what energy is. And it makes a difference with a higher frequency. I don't understand exactly how the frequencies work, but I've been around a lot of these creatures. I've been very blessed to be able to be around some of them, and not all of them were friendly, but
Mhm.
some of them weren't friendly. But I know that they have the ability. I've never seen one cloak right in front of me, no, or go interdimensional. But I pretty much had a similar thing happen to me, like you were talking about with this gentleman. I watched a large one walk behind a big beech tree, large beech tree in the clearing, and when it walked behind it, it never came out. And I don't
Mhm.
know where it could have went because there was nowhere else for it to go. There was no structure or anything around it. Dr. Matthew Johnson's in our group, and I personally think that the guy's a genius. But there's a lot of people that don't believe in his theories or what he's seen, but I do, and I think he's an incredible guy, and I think he's very credible. He has a camp called Camp Xanu, which I had found out about Matthew Johnson back in 2015 or 16. I'd never heard of him until then. a friend of mine, Michael Patterson, said, "You got to listen to this Matthew Johnson man because he's had similar experiences like you had. You need to listen to his Great Reveal 1 CD and DVD at that time." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "You need to listen to it. It's pretty incredible." And I did. And, these creatures that I call the forest people, it was real similar. I never heard of Matthew Johnson. He calls them the forest people. He calls them the Xanu, which is Xanue. And the friendly ones, the real forest people, which are very similar to Bigfoot, the ones who make the large X's, which these creatures had large X's all around this area they lived in. And they have them on the ground too, just wood structures that look like an X. And what they stuck through the milk carton on all four sides was an X coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, well, had to be the same thing that he experienced because they were the same friendly type and they had the X's. So I pretty much bought into Matthew Johnson when I started hearing that because it was what I'd already lived through that
Yeah.
he had experienced after mine. And he says that they can do a lot more than go interdimensional. And, they do have special powers. I know that for sure. I've been in deep in the woods and lost all my electronics. I mean, I'm talking about my watch even stopped, my wristwatch at 12:48 at night in Cheatham County. And that was back in 2020. But they have some way of using their inner ability with their energy to drain even your energy from some things. So 100%, yes, I believe it can go interdimensional. No
Fair.
doubt.
I think that's fair. So, okay, I cannot sketch or draw to save my life, but let's just pretend that in this timeline, I am a police sketch artist. Could you please kindly explain to me what these friendly forest people looked like? What was the color of their hair, their eyes?
Every Bigfoot or forest person or Sasquatch that I've ever seen, every one of them have been black. I've never seen any other color. Now I've got
Oh,
friends that's seen brown ones, red colored ones, gray ones, white ones, but I've never seen anything but black. So I don't know why that is, but there's actually at the time when I had my first experience in November the 6th of '92. I was so frightened and scared to death about these things after my grandfather had told me about them. I actually, there wasn't any Google or anything to pull up at that time to find anything like that. You had to go to the library. So I went to the library. I actually went to several libraries to try to find pictures of what I'd seen.
mm-hmm.
And after a long search, I found pictures. And there was one book, and I can't recall what it was called, but I've actually seen it since then, but it listed 10 different type of Bigfoot creatures. And looking over the pictures, I believe in my lifetime, I've seen 3 different types. I may have seen more, but that's what I believe. And the first one, the number 2 in this particular picture was called the woodbooger. And that's the one I've seen the first time. The number 3 and 4 were very similar to what I've seen on the river. They were, their head wasn't shaped anything like the first one. They were more similar to the Patterson Gimlin type, Bob
Okay.
Gimlin type creature. They were more of that style looking, but they were black. Um, and then I've seen another type several times, and I would relate it to a number 4 or 5, and there was 10 of them in there, but the ones I'd seen seemed to more go in line with a 2 through 5, but they all look different in these pictures. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I may have seen one that was different because I've run into some of these creatures in the pitch dark, and I could see a silhouette of them, and I couldn't tell what they looked like. But there may have been a different one there. But
That makes
so that's
sense.
how I would probably give you an answer. It would be by the picture I've seen. And I've actually had a similar picture, and I do have a picture of what I seen the first time. And
Hmm.
Actually, Linda Woods, who's in my group, she actually, Linda does some artwork. It's AI art, was what it is. It's AI artwork, and she brought me a picture. She brought me a picture anyway and drew it. I'm sorry, my daughter came in, but
That's okay. Do you need a moment?
she brought me. No, I'm good.
Oh,
She brought me a picture of. I showed her what I had, and she kind of redid it, and it was really close to what I'd seen, except for the eyes. The eyes weren't red; they were just regular colored dark eyes. But there's lots of pictures out there. But if you can find that, somebody told me it was on Reddit. I haven't. I don't know how to get on Reddit. I haven't looked on Reddit, but I was told that there was similar thing there with 10 different types that they list. So that would be my that would be the only way I could tell you how to look them up. But what I've
no,
seen anyway. But I mean, there may be other. Sorry to mean to bore you with so long a story, but that's
all right. I'm not bored, not at all. I do have to keep an eye on the clock, however, and we are coming to the end of our time today, my friend. So, for
okay.
my audience and for you, Darrell, thank you so much for joining myself and my team today. We and I certainly appreciate you being here. Do you have any email addresses, any show links, or anything that you would like to encourage the audience to interact with or contact you with?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to ask everybody to join my group. If you're not a member, it's Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures. Not Bigfoot Believers, but Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures. And support my close friends that I research with. Martin Groves, my friend of 43 years. He's probably number one dog man person in the world. His new book is coming out. It will be The Devil's Backbone, Beast Between the Rivers. Martin Nunley, my other teammate that I work with, he has a show called Humanoids, and he has about 5 books out. All of them are great. And then Mr. Ron Moorhead, who I think the world of, that is a research partner with me too. His new book is coming out, and it just recently came out. So I would appreciate if you'd support my close friends and join my group. And you're welcome to contact me or post or anything. And besides that, thank you so much for having me, Tilly. I've enjoyed being on the show. And I wish I had drug out as much as I had on some of my stories, but it's kind of hard to tell them without doing that. So,
Oh, well, that's all right. I mean, sometimes a story really does deserve to be told in full, I think. And I didn't find it boring at all. I just, of course, I have to keep an eye on the clock and
oh, I
I leave
understand. Yeah.
life
Thank
to
you
stay.
for having me on.
You're most welcome. So until next time, everyone, I wish you a merry morning or a magical midnight.